Shella is a site reliability engineer working on Uber's migration from bare metal to the cloud. She's been with Uber for almost 2 years now, and since we double headcount every 6 months, that makes her newer than 87.5% of the company. Before Uber, Shella was an infrastructure engineer at LinkedIn, where she was instrumental moving LinkedIn to an all-active architecture. And at Uber, Shella has been instrumental in our data center build-outs, and she's here to talk to you about that and a few other things today. Tom Croucher, he's been at Uber 2 years, before which he was at many companies, including being CTO of Change.org. Tom's co-authored several books, including Up and Running with Node.js. His time at Uber has seen him serve as a manager, a senior lead engineer, build frameworks that our developers use every day. And most recently, he led our efforts to harden our systems ahead of New Year's Eve 2015. I'd like to welcome Uber's SRE's resident failover enthusiast, Tom.
Cheers. Thank you, Chris. It's kind of a weird moniker, isn't it? Failover enthusiast. Okay, so I will be enthusiastic about some things. So what Shella and I really want to talk about is dealing with scale. And there are a whole bunch of things that means, and there's way too much to actually talk about. So we're going to talk about two sort of concepts that resonated with us about how we've really scaled. And I'm going to talk about shaping reality, or sort of how you trick developers into doing things without them realizing. And Shella's going to talk about repeatability and how we can use these concepts in order to kind of make it possible to cope with Uber scale. So as Chris mentioned, I've been lots of places. I've sort of done a whole bunch of different things in my career in terms of working at different places in the Valley, in the UK, all kinds of places. Mostly I've done internet. And when I joined Uber, I thought, I've got these different offers. I did what I always do, and I had an offer from like a startup, like a pre-A, early startup. I had this offer from Uber, this crazy guy I know that decided to write a $50 billion company, or I guess $3 billion then, in JavaScript. It's weird. And, a Fortune 500, wanted me to do something, right? And I'm looking at these things, I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to pick the middle one. I'm going to pick the thing that seems, it's going to be exciting, but it's not going to be too terrible. I'm going to be able to do whatever I'm going to do. And then the problem is every time I think that we sort of hit, this like inflection point and everything is going to get a little bit calmer, Uber just gets that little bit more crazy. And, some of the things that Rick has mentioned really exemplify that. Hey, you guys, can you build out these data centers in China? And by the way, you've got about 3 months, right? These are problems that, people come to us with. And once you've been at Uber for 2 years, they stop seeming crazy. They just seem like this is normal. And this is, kind of something that we have to deal with. I've been at Uber, and Shella has been at Uber long enough that, the engineers that I know is, this many people. So when I started at Uber, we had some office near Yerba Buena. Now we have 3 offices on market, most of which are full of engineers. And, 2 floors of this building are full of engineers. And I work in a completely different building. All of these people, how do I deal with that? All of these technologies, how do I deal with that? All of these services, Rick said the sort of crazy growth of services. How do we deal with that? One of the jobs that I did last year was preparing for New Year's Eve. Another one was sort of migrating a bunch of stuff across many data centers. And the thing that I like to think of is like, you pull a Steve Jobs. You say to all these folks like, hey, you don't actually, kind of know what you want. They're like, oh, I want like an improved, I don't know. I used to have my original phone was, my original cell phone was the Matrix phone. Yeah, I'm old, sorry. And it was that one where you sort of press the button, it went, shoop. It did WAP. It didn't even do like real web. It did this like weird like hypercard thing. And Steve Jobs turned up and he went, nah, that's all crap. Here is this like iPhone thing. And everybody's like, you're crazy. And he used the Steve Jobs like reality distortion field and made it work. So one of the things that I sort of try and do is obviously not product stuff. You do not want me designing anything. But if we say like, hey, engineers, we would like all of your stuff to work in all of our data centers. But then the actual amount of time that you run in your secondary data center with failover is, this isn't even like remotely accurate, right? It's tiny, like sliver, the actual amount of time you fail over, then the amount of engineers that actually build something reliable are the ones that are most afraid of being shouted at by the CEO and literally nobody else, right? So this is how Uber looked when I joined. This was like a few sort of conscientious like service owners did this and everybody else kind of ignored it. So failover testing, or what happens when the cooling breaks in the China data center. We actually had this. This happened. Data centers, it turns out, have failures, surprisingly, right? And it was a big shock to like a lot of folks because suddenly this unexpected thing of like an entire data center just is completely unavailable. Like literally the whole cooling broke and we were going through server by server, shutting down racks so that our, mumble dollar figure of hardware didn't actually bake in the heat. And developers were like, wait, what? Like, I didn't know you were going to do this. And it's like, well, neither did I. I had plans, tonight. So that whole thing spurned a lot of effort to sort of start changing the behavior. So we started saying like, okay, well, what happens if we just start moving services around, right? And it turns into a new reality. It's no longer, hey, I can just ignore the other data center because it doesn't really exist. You start changing the perception because now people believe like, hey, look, this other data center is real. It's not just something theoretical that I have to, pretend doesn't exist, right? It becomes their reality, not just mine as SRE. Now, that's okay, but one of the things that we looked at was like, how do we sort of make this a process? So, Seb, where are you? Seb, stand up. There we go. Turn around. This is Seb. First iteration was Seb Destroy. So I took a photo of one of the things. You can see Seb's lovely face on the Incredible Hulk. The first version of this was Seb would just go and mess with your shit. And Seb would just go, oh, that server just disappeared. Whoops. Right? So this worked really well to begin with because it meant that we could actually figure out how to do it in a way which was minimally impacting. Like, obviously, we don't really want to mess up customers to get to a good place. So Seb could go and figure out how do we sort of tweak some of these things without really upsetting people. The next thing is like, how do we form a baseline for repetition? So like, it's all right, Seb, just kind of doing it by hand, but it's not really very scalable. So we looked at like, what can we do? And we worked with the core services, so the marketplace team, the team that does all the dispatching, the really, really important stuff, not Uber Music. I'm sorry if anybody works at Uber Music, but not that. And we made sure that the replication for this stuff worked so that we could just flip-flop back and forth and say like, okay, we can fail over at a whim, and we know that we're not impacting customers for any of the most critical flows. We combine that with what we call the Zombie Apocalypse Recovery Toolkit. It's basically a set of tools that help us deal with any kind of crazy problem. And that meant that we could start just pressing the button, like, whoop, we just failed over. Whoop, we just failed over. And we did a bunch of these drills with lots and lots of teams, and suddenly it became their reality. One of the things actually Chris has built, so Chris is sort of emceeing all these other people tonight. Chris's team built Udestroy. So this is our version of like the Simian army. And, the first version is people opt in. There are different scenarios they can run by hand. Increasingly, we're using something called UHammer, where we basically, on a random schedule, we're going to bash a service and you opt into that. So all of these things set a reality. And in particular, actually, the self-service model is the best. Because if UHammer just randomly destroys parts of your infrastructure or randomly fails over, it's not Chris doing it, it's not Seb doing it, it's just the reality. Like, servers disappear, racks disappear, data centers disappear. SRE are not the bad guys. We can't be the bad guys. We're about reliability, but we can't be adversarial, right? We create a new reality so that we can get the affect that we want from these very smart people without actually, sort of going up and saying, you must make your service reliable, let me hit you with my clue bat. So asking for what you want. I want a pony. If anybody has a pony, see me later. This made a big difference for us. So we used to run a lot of our stuff sort of with this failover mode. And instead we said, okay, well, we have this intention to use all of our data centers actively to do like an N+1 style of approach where, we have a bunch of replication everywhere. And we were doing the replication and we were doing a bunch of this stuff. And we just said, well, look, we're not quite ready. We don't quite have every polished thing that we want to use all these data centers, 100% in the way that we intended. But you know what? Let's just go for it, because it turns out that, again, the amount of data centers that the services are actually receiving traffic in is exactly the amount of data centers that developers will code for. So we said, okay, well, let's just make this an all data center reality, an all active reality. So by doing that, suddenly a developer can't ignore the fact that some data center exists. They can't have a service that doesn't work in that data center, because we've shaped their perception of the world and we've just given them a problem space to operate in. And suddenly we started finding all of the sharp edges or all of the design flaws that we actually had in our architecture. And people came up and said, hey, I can't do this thing that I really need to do. And we're like, okay, great. Let's solve that with you. So this presents many problems and many opportunities. Rick talked about we want to be 400 milliseconds for trips and all these core flows. We want to have high levels of availability. How do we do that? It actually turns out that by running in multiple data centers and multiple clouds and all kinds of things all over the world, we have all these interesting problems. If you've got a rider from Bangalore, they're traveling in a place where they do not live, in a remote data center, and somebody's using api.uber.com to control their trip or to book it. How does that work? How do we get the data to the right place? How do we make that low latency? How do we make it so that it appears magical? Like, these are all real problems, and they're real problems that we want the vast iceberg of Uber engineering to not personally solve. Because if the vast iceberg of Uber engineering have to personally solve these every time, we're wasting so much time and effort. So one of the things that I love about being an Uber SRE is that I actually get to work on these problems and set up an environment, set up a reality where the vast majority of the engineers in this building actually work on solving their just specific product problem or building their specific product without having to even think about how it works in this crazy, weird, convoluted use case of different cases all sort of rammed together. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Shella to talk about repeatability.
Hi, I'm Shella, and I've been here for about 2 years. And in that time, we've really grown. When I first joined, we were about 100 cities, and that was like April 2014. And now we're at 370. So in that time, we were kind of mostly just based in America. We were in Europe, but we had hosted data centers, and from there, we were like, oh, we're really growing, and maybe we should own the whole entire stack, because we didn't own the networking equipment. We couldn't really control our environment. And from there, around fall 2014, we finally got our first two primary and secondary data centers in America. And from there, we were, this is 2014, we brought up the first primary data center. Halloween 2014, we ran into a lot of problems, but we were able in that time period that we're bringing up the secondary data center and the East Coast, we were able to learn from that. And then New Year's 2014, we pretty much went off without hitch. So now we're in, So now we're in 2015, and we're in a lot more cities, 200 cities. And about in April 2014, we had brought up China Online. And suddenly, oh, wait, a lot of people like ride sharing in China. So we're like, okay, we need to actually get data centers up there. And as Tom said, we were thinking about active, but we were kind of still in a active-passive like architecture for our data centers. And our primary data center in America, at that point, if we kept all the world traffic going there, it would have toppled over. So at that point, we had to start really thinking about how are we going to start directing traffic and really controlling our growth. And the China project brought a lot of we had to bring it up kind of siloed from America. There's a lot of security, we had to take a lot of things in mind. And as that project, it was kind of like repeatability. Like it was kind of separate from the America. Like we took like the core aspects, which I'll talk later about some of the tools we use, but it was very we learned a lot, but I'll go in more detail. So in the future, so like right now we're I think 374 cities worldwide, and our future, one of like the SRE goals is hopefully or later this year. We're kind of in a proof of concept mode right now, but say you're in India, that network is, well, we've heard from like customers and stuff, like latency is like really high and you're not really like getting the best experience. So we're moving towards being able to, as we move towards this active, being able to mesh over the whole entire world and hopefully serve and provide a better service worldwide. Okay. So kind of like on the repeatability, the 4 things that we found that kind of each time we have to make sure are, the core aspects that we have to make repeatable and automated. And it's servers, network, storage, and discovery and routing. I'll go more. So when I first started, it was a very manual process. It was, like maybe 200 servers, and suddenly we have 4 data centers in less than a year. And from there, we was, moving to actual scripts where we can bring up like hundreds to now a automated self-serve UI that engineers can use. So we're like moving from one team being the blocker to enabling other engineers to do their jobs. And some of the tools we use are FAI, which is like imaging, and then open source tool called Clusto. It's from Dig. It's kind of a cluster management tool. And of course, Puppet, configuration management, like how do you make servers look, I need like 80 app servers, how do I make them look like each other? And from there, uServer, which is our provisioning tool, Maestro, which is kind of like our networking augmenting tool that SecOps uses, and then udeploy, which is like allows engineers to deploy their own code on their own time, and it kind of again takes it like uServer, puts the power in the engineers mode. And then kind of one of the tools that we're using, starting to use and forming tools around is Terraform, and that's kind of for HashiCorp. That's allows you to kind of make agnostic clouds, and from there you can have use multiple providers. And like before, I was saying before, or in 2016, like one of our major projects is as we grow worldwide, we need to be able to serve the whole entire globe. And having data centers, you can't just, it's a lot of money. And we're not Google yet, and we're still working towards making everything repeatable. So this is kind of like, in the future, we'll be able to use AWS providers, GCP, and, as Tom was saying, like active, like how is that going to like feed back into our kind of like our mothership DCs, and we'll be able to have a mesh network worldwide and really make Uber reliable and better service worldwide. And then like repeatability goals. So like one of the biggest things I've been like since I've been here is really seeing like the whole entire org is moving away from just like one team blocking to code. So if you see something like servers or any, deploying, spreading knowledge and adoption and tools has really like sped up everyone's time. From the first data center, we were doing everything. It was like the core infra to, the last data center, it's in China. It's been pretty like fast, and we've empowered other engineers to be able to do their jobs faster. And then other second goal would be, faster data center turnup. We like hit some problems in China just because, its own challenges there, but being able to take those and like apply like where we need to be fully automated, so then we have like a virtual turnup. And one of our future goals is our project is 24-hour turnup and like software, and then like a week in physical data center if we need to. And then of course, if that's cloud, even faster. And then as we work towards that mesh network, we'll be able to provide a better service worldwide and transportation as reliable as running water.